When a broken young woman was sold for being lame, the mountain man who took her in thought he was offering her a second chance. But in just 3 days, he discovered the truth that would change both their lives forever. Gunshots echoed through the howling blizzard, three sharp cracks that cut through the wind like knives. Colton Wade chambered another round, his weathered hands steady despite the cold. The wolf dropped in mid-leap, its massive body tumbling into the snow just yards from the overturned wagon. The storm had swallowed every other sound, but Colton's trained ear caught something else, a whimper, human and afraid. He approached cautiously, Winchester still raised. The wagon lay broken on its side, one wheel spinning uselessly in the wind. And there, half buried in the snow, lay a young woman. Her face was pale as the storm around her, blood frozen on her temple. But it wasn't her injury that made Colton's jaw tighten. It was the iron manacle around her ankle. Its chain snapped, but the intent clear. Someone had bound her like an animal. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. "He'll come for me." Colton Wade had survived the war between the states, had tracked men across territories where most couldn't survive a night. At 45, his beard was streaked with gray, his body mapped with scars from battles both famous and forgotten. The last thing he needed was trouble with the law, or worse, with whoever had put chains on a woman. But as the snow began to bury them both, he made his choice. "Can you stand, miss?" he asked, already knowing the answer, as his eyes tracked her right leg. Twisted wrong, clearly damaged long before today's crash. "I can try," she replied, setting her jaw in determination. That simple act of courage decided it. Colton holstered his gun, lifted her from the snow, and carried her toward his cabin, leaving the howling wilderness to swallow their tracks. The fire crackled in Colton's stone hearth, pushing back the darkness that pressed against the cabin windows. Abigail Mason, she'd finally given her name after an hour of wary silence, sat wrapped in a worn buffalo hide, her hands curled around a tin cup of coffee laced with whiskey. "Wyoming Territory's no place for a Boston lady," Colton observed, cleaning his rifle with practiced efficiency, "especially one running from something." Her eyes flashed. "I'm not running from something. I'm running towards something. Justice!" Colton's weathered face remained impassive. 15 years in these mountains had taught him patience. She'd talk or she wouldn't. Either way, the storm had them trapped for at least 2 days. "My parents died in a fire," she finally continued, staring into the flames as if seeing ghosts. "Marshall Young, my supposed uncle, appeared at the funeral, said he was my father's long-lost brother." Her laugh was brittle as winter ice. "Within a month, he had control of everything. Our house in Boston, father's businesses, and the silver mine here in Wyoming." "Silver?" Colton's hands paused momentarily. "Silver meant money. Money meant trouble. The last chance mine. My father purchased it last year." She turned, meeting his gaze directly. "When I questioned Young's documents, I had an accident. The stairs gave way beneath me." She gestured to her right leg. "Once I was broken, I was easier to control. Last week, he sold me, actually sold me, to Edgar Blackwood, the mine operator in Redemption. Said a cripple should be grateful anyone would take her." Colton's expression hardened. "So you escaped?" "During the transfer. The storm hit, the driver was drunk. Providence, perhaps." She clutched the blanket tighter. "But Young won't stop. I'm worth too much." The wind howled louder, rattling the cabin's sturdy logs. Colton rose and added another log to the fire, his mind working. He'd built this place to escape men and their greed, their wars. He had no desire to invite that world back in. Later that night, while Abigail slept, Colton examined the contents of the small bag she'd managed to save from the wreck. Beneath a spare dress and a worn Bible, he found something unexpected, folded papers bearing official seals. His reading was slow, hard-won from years of forced schooling, but the meaning became clear enough. These weren't just any documents. They were deeds and certificates of ownership for the Last Chance mine, all bearing Abigail Mason's name. According to these papers, she owned the richest silver deposit in the territory, a fortune that would make men kill without hesitation. Colton folded the papers carefully, understanding at last what kind of storm had blown onto his mountain. This wasn't just about a young woman sold into marriage. This was about millions in silver and a man willing to destroy anyone who stood between him and that fortune. Dawn broke clear and cold, the storm temporarily exhausted. Colton stood on his porch, scanning the pristine white landscape with eyes trained in war. The mountains revealed nothing, but his instincts screamed danger. "They'll come from the south," he said as Abigail limped to his side, leaning on a crude crutch he'd fashioned. "Trail's easier there, even in snow." "How many?" she asked, her voice stronger than yesterday. "If it were my operation, 6 men, well armed." He turned to her. "Miss Mason, I should take you to the territorial marshal. This is a matter for the law." Her eyes hardened. "Young owns the local law. Marshal Young has been building his empire for years. Judge Crawford dines at his table. Sheriff Wilkins wears a badge Young paid for." "Not all lawmen can be bought," Colton countered. "Are you willing to bet my life on that?" she challenged. Before he could answer, a glint of metal caught his eye, sunlight reflecting off a spyglass perhaps, 2 miles down the valley. They weren't waiting for the snow to melt. They were already coming. Colton moved with sudden purpose, gathering supplies, ammunition, food. "There's a hunting cabin, 3 ridges east. We'll head there. Lay false trails." "I'll slow you down," Abigail said, glancing at her leg. Colton tossed her a shotgun, which she caught reflexively. "Can you shoot?" A thin smile crossed her face. "Father believed women should defend themselves." "Then you won't slow me down." He shouldered his pack. "We leave in 10 minutes." They vanished into the forest just as the first riders appeared in the valley below. 6 men, just as Colton had predicted, led by a figure in a black coat who rode with military precision. The hunting cabin was little more than a lean-to with walls, but it was invisible from below and defensible from above, a soldier's choice. As darkness fell, Colton watched their back trail through his brass telescope. The search party had split up, 3 men continuing up the main valley, 3 cutting east, following the faint tracks Colton had intentionally left. "They're good," he admitted. "Not good enough, but good." Abigail sat beside him, her breath frosting in the cold air. The day's journey had been brutal, but she hadn't complained once. Not even when they'd crossed the half-frozen stream that would mask their scent from tracking dogs. "You were a soldier," she said, not a question. Colton nodded once. "Union, 3rd Regiment sharpshooters. I could hit a man at 900 yards. His voice carried no pride, only statement of fact. "Fought from Bull Run to Appomattox." "Is that why you came out here? To escape the memories?" His silence was answer enough. The crack of a branch breaking echoed through the twilight. Colton was on his feet instantly, rifle ready. "Inside," he whispered. They slipped into the cabin's dark interior. Through cracks in the rough-hewn walls, they watched as 2 men approached, rifles at the ready. Bounty hunters by their look, hard men who tracked human prey for money. "Spread out," the taller one ordered. "Wade's no amateur. Check the high ground." Colton's jaw tightened. They knew his name. This wasn't just about Abigail anymore. The bounty hunters advanced cautiously, checking each shadow. They were 20 yards away when one stopped, kneeling to examine something in the snow. Colton cursed silently, a torn piece of Abigail's dress, caught on a branch during their crossing. "Jenkins!" the man hissed, holding up his find. Colton raised his rifle. 2 shots, 2 men down, it would be easy, but gunfire would bring the others. He had to be smarter. Suddenly, Abigail limped forward, took aim with her shotgun, and fired into the air. The boom echoed across the valley like thunder. "What the hell?" Colton began, but she was already moving, knocking over their lantern. Oil spilled across the cabin floor, igniting instantly. "Run!" she shouted, already hobbling toward the back exit. The bounty hunters charged toward the sudden commotion and fire, giving Colton and Abigail precious seconds to vanish into the forest behind the cabin. As flames consumed their shelter, they fled deeper into the wilderness, the fire behind them sure to draw every searcher for miles. "That was either the bravest or stupidest thing I've seen," Colton growled when they finally stopped, hidden in a rocky outcropping a mile away. "It worked, didn't it?" she replied, eyes gleaming in the moonlight. For the first time in years, Colton Wade smiled. Redemption was a town built on silver dreams and whiskey courage. One main street lined with saloons, brothels, and the bare necessities of civilization. Colton and Abigail watched it from the pine ridge above, having circled wide around their pursuers. "Your uncle's office?" Colton asked. Glasses trained on the largest building, a 2-story affair with actual glass windows. "Above the Territorial Bank," she confirmed, "where he keeps the real documents, the ones that would prove his fraud." Their plan was simple but dangerous. Enter town under cover of the weekly supply wagon, retrieve the evidence of Young's forgery from his office, then escape to the territorial capital where a federal judge might give them fair hearing. What they hadn't planned for was the wanted posters plastered across town, bearing both their likenesses. Wanted Colton Wade, kidnapping, theft, murder, $500 reward, dead or alive wanted. Abigail Mason escaped ward, mentally unsound, $1,000 reward. Alive. "Murder?" Abigail whispered as they huddled in the shadow of the livery. "Who did you supposedly kill?" "Edgar Blackwood, I'd wager," Colton replied grimly. "Your intended husband is likely dead, and I'm the convenient scapegoat." A new complication emerged as they watched the main street. Cheyenne warriors, 3 of them being paraded in chains toward the jailhouse. The town was in an uproar, men gathering with rifles, women hurrying children indoors. "What's happening?" Abigail asked. "Convenient timing," Colton muttered. "Nothing unites white settlers like fear of an Indian uprising. Young's creating a distraction, making sure every eye in town is looking outward, not at him." Their opportunity came at dusk, when the saloons began filling and the street emptied of respectable citizens. Dressed in clothes stolen from a washing line, they slipped through back alleys toward the bank. Colton lifted Abigail to the second-floor balcony, then pulled himself up after her. The office window yielded to his knife, and they slipped inside a room that reeked of wealth and power. Leather-bound books, expensive brandy, a massive oak desk. "There," Abigail whispered, pointing to an iron safe in the corner. Colton knelt before it, ear pressed to the cold metal as he worked the dial with calloused fingers. Each click seemed thunderous in the quiet room. "Where did a sharpshooter learn to crack safes?" Abigail asked, keeping watch by the window. "Prison," he answered flatly. "After the war, before I came west. Some skills stick with you." The safe swung open, revealing stacks of documents. Abigail rifled through them frantically until she found what she sought. Her father's original will, unaltered, and letters between Young and various officials arranging the accident that had crippled her. "Got them," she breathed, tucking the papers into her dress. Their victory was short-lived. Below, hoofbeats approached, a rider galloping at full speed. Through the window, they watched as a man in a Union Army jacket dismounted before the bank's entrance. "Sheriff Miller," Colton whispered, recognizing his old comrade from the war. "Frank Miller. We served together at Petersburg." "Friend or foe?" Abigail asked urgently. "Once a friend. Now..." Colton shook his head. He wears Young's badge. They were halfway to the back window when the office door crashed open. Sheriff Miller stood framed in the doorway, revolver drawn, face grim beneath his mustache. "Hello, Colt," he said quietly. "Frank?" Colton didn't reach for his gun. "Still fighting other men's battles, I see." Miller's eyes flicked to Abigail, then back to Colton. "Town's saying you've taken to kidnapping and murder. Not the Colton Wade I knew." "The Colton Wade you knew died at Appomattox," Colton replied. "Just like the Frank Miller I knew wouldn't be enforcing the will of a man like Marshall Young." Something shifted in Miller's eyes. "What's Young to you?" "He's building an empire on stolen land and stolen lives," Abigail said fiercely. "He murdered my parents, crippled me, and now he's framing Colton for another murder." Miller's gun remained steady. "That's a bold claim, ma'am." "We have proof," Colton said, nodding toward the papers in Abigail's possession. A heartbeat passed. 2. Miller's gun didn't waver. "You should know," the sheriff said slowly, "Young isn't just some ambitious businessman. During the war, he was Colonel Marshall Young, Confederate cavalry, the butcher of Black Creek." The name hit Colton like physical blow. Black Creek, Virginia. His unit, pinned down. The white flag raised. Then slaughter. 43 men executed after surrender. Colton had survived only by falling among the dead, lying motionless for hours as blood soaked into the ground beneath him. "That can't be," he whispered. "Changed his name after the war," Miller continued. "But it's him. I recognized him 2 months ago when he bought the judge a new house." Understanding dawned in Colton's eyes. This wasn't just about silver anymore. This was about a debt of blood 15 years in the making. Before another word could be spoken, gunshots erupted from the street below. Not random fire, controlled volleys. An attack. "The Cheyenne prisoners," Miller said, holstering his weapon. "Young's men are creating a panic, claiming a jailbreak to justify a slaughter." He looked at Colton, decision made. "You've got 10 minutes before they secure the town. Back door, through the tannery. Take my horse. Frank, go! And when this is over, remember who helped you." They fled into chaos. The street had become a battlefield, townsfolk firing wildly at shadows, the 3 Cheyenne prisoners already dead in the dust. Young's strategy was brilliant and terrible. A fake uprising giving him license to impose martial law, to search every building for conspirators. They had almost reached Miller's horse when disaster struck. A searchlight mounted on the bank roof swept across the alley, catching them in its glare. "There!" a voice shouted. "It's Wade and the girl!" Gunfire erupted around them. Colton shoved Abigail behind a water trough, returning fire with deadly precision. 3 shots, 3 men down. But there were more coming. "Go!" he shouted, thrusting the reins into Abigail's hands. "The federal marshal in Laramie. Ask for Thomas Jenkins. Give him the papers." "Not without you," she protested. "One of us has to make it." He fired again, dropping another attacker. "Young dies by law or by bullet, but he dies. That's what matters." Something in his voice, the same determination she'd shown when escaping her captors, made Abigail nod. She mounted awkwardly, gripping the saddle horn. "Ride straight for the ridge," Colton instructed, firing again to clear her path. "Don't stop for anything." As Abigail galloped away, Colton turned to face the approaching mob, a man transformed by purpose. He was no longer the recluse seeking peace in the mountains. He was the soldier again, fighting his last battle against an enemy he'd thought long defeated. He never saw the blow that took him down, a rifle butt to the back of his head. As darkness claimed him, his last thought was of Abigail, riding hard for freedom, carrying the truth that might bring justice at last. Colton awakened to pain and cold. He lay on a stone floor, his hands bound behind him. Through swollen eyes, he made out the iron bars of Redemption's jail. Finally rejoining us, Mr. Wade. The voice was cultured, almost gentle, a southern gentleman's voice that concealed the monster beneath. Colton forced himself to look up at Marshall Young. He appeared nothing like the nightmare Colton remembered. No blood-spattered uniform, no savage grin as he ordered prisoners shot. This Marshall Young was refined, silver-haired, expensively dressed. Only the cold eyes remained the same. "I must thank you," Young continued, pacing before the cell. "You've solved several problems for me. The Cheyenne troublemakers eliminated, a convenient scapegoat for Blackwood's unfortunate accident. And best of all," he smiled thinly, "the location of my wayward niece." Colton's blood ran cold. "You're lying. She got away." "Did she?" Young produced a torn piece of fabric, the sleeve from Abigail's dress, stained with fresh blood. "My men are very efficient trackers. By now, she's either returning to more comfortable accommodations or feeding the wolves." He shrugged. "Either way, her brief rebellion is finished." Rage gave Colton strength he didn't know he still possessed. He lunged against the bars, straining against his bonds. "I know who you are, Colonel. The butcher of Black Creek. I was there." If he expected shock or fear, he was disappointed. Young merely looked amused. "Black Creek? Ancient history, Mr. Wade. This is business." Young straightened his already immaculate coat. "You'll hang tomorrow at noon. A public spectacle to remind everyone in this territory who holds the power of life and death." As Young turned to leave, Colton called after him. "Did you kill her parents too? Burn them alive for their silver?" Young paused at the doorway, a slight smile on his lips. Mr. Mason was an astute businessman. He should have known better than to trust his long-lost brother-in-law. The smile widened. "Oh yes, that's the final irony, Wade. I'm not her uncle. Never was. Amazing what a few altered documents can accomplish." The door closed, leaving Colton alone with this new horror, the knowledge that Young's evil ran even deeper than he'd imagined. The night passed slowly. Colton worked tirelessly at his bonds, rubbing the rough hemp against a jagged stone in the wall. By dawn, his wrists were bleeding, but the ropes remained intact. As the first light filtered through the barred window, he heard the gallows being constructed in the town square. Then unexpectedly, the cell door opened. Sheriff Miller stood there, face grim, keys in hand. "Frank?" Colton struggled to his feet. "No time," Miller hissed, cutting Colton's bonds. "Young's hanging those Cheyenne women and children at dawn. Public execution to send a message. Then you're next. Abigail, alive for now. Young's men caught her, but he wants her to watch you hang before he deals with her." Miller pressed a revolver into Colton's hand. "I've done what I can. The rest is up to you." Gunfire erupted outside, not the controlled volleys of soldiers, but the chaotic exchange of a pitched battle. "What the hell?" Miller rushed to the window. The sight that greeted them was astonishing. Riders poured into the town square. Cheyenne warriors on paint ponies, led by a figure Miller and Colton both recognized instantly. "Abigail," Colton breathed. She rode at the front of the war party, her golden hair visible beneath a borrowed hat, her face set with determination. Somehow she'd not only escaped Young's men, but rallied the Cheyenne to her cause. "Impossible," Miller whispered. "Not for her," Colton replied, already moving. There was fighting to be done. The battle for redemption unfolded like a fever dream. Young's men, caught by surprise, fell back into defensive positions around the bank. Townspeople either fled or joined the fight, some alongside Young, others who had suffered under his rule alongside the Cheyenne and Abigail. Colton fought his way through the chaos, dropping men with the cold efficiency that had made him legendary during the war. His target wasn't the bank, however. It was the gallows, where terrified Cheyenne women and children huddled, surrounded by armed guards. The first guard felt a Colton's bullet before he even registered the threat. The second managed to raise his rifle before a Cheyenne arrow took him through the throat. The third surrendered, dropping his weapon and fleeing. As Colton cut the prisoner's bonds, he caught sight of Abigail across the square. She had dismounted and was limping determinedly toward the bank, flanked by warriors. Even with her damaged leg, she moved with purpose that bordered on ferocity. Young appeared on the bank's balcony, rifle in hand. His first shot caught a warrior in the chest. His second was aimed squarely at Abigail. Colton's rifle snapped up instinctively. 900 yards at Antietam, 600 at Gettysburg, 50 yards in Redemption. The shot was almost too easy. Young staggered as Colton's bullet took him in the shoulder. He dropped his rifle but didn't fall. Instead, he retreated into the bank, wounded but still dangerous. The fighting intensified as Colton and Abigail converged on the bank from different directions. They met at the front entrance, both bloodied but unbroken. "You came back for me," he said, voice rough with emotion. "We came back for justice," she corrected, gesturing to the Cheyenne warriors. "Young stole their land too. We have a common enemy." Together they entered the bank, weapons ready. Young awaited them in his office, seated calmly behind his desk despite his bleeding shoulder. A revolver lay before him, within easy reach. "Quite the partnership," Young observed, looking between them. The broken soldier and the crippled girl, leading a savage army. Poetic in its way. "It's over, Young," Colton said. "The territorial marshal is on his way with federal agents. Your empire is finished." Young's smile never wavered. "Empires never truly fall, Mr. Wade. They merely change hands." His eyes locked on Abigail. "Your father understood that. A pity you won't live to enjoy your inheritance." His hand darted for the revolver. Colton's reaction was instantaneous, born from years of war. His rifle was already rising when Abigail's shotgun roared beside him. Young was thrown backward, his chest a ruined mess, the revolver unfired in his lifeless hand. Silence fell. Colton turned to Abigail, seeing her in a new light. Not just a victim he'd saved, but a warrior who'd saved him in return. "It's done," she said quietly, lowering the shotgun. "Yes," Colton agreed, hearing the distant sound of approaching riders. The law coming too late as usual. "It's done." 1 month later, Colton stood on the porch of his rebuilt cabin, watching the valley below. Spring had arrived early, painting the mountainsides with wildflowers and fresh green. In the distance, the newly renamed town of New Redemption was growing, buildings rising where once there had been only tents and shacks. The Last Chance Mine was operational again under Abigail's ownership. True to her word, she had honored her agreement with the Cheyenne, deeding part of her land back to them and employing their men at fair wages. The federal investigation had cleared both her and Colton, exposing Young's network of corruption and violence that had stretched across 3 territories. As for Colton and Abigail, they had found something neither expected. Not romance, but partnership. She had offered him the position of mine security, which he had accepted with the condition that he could keep his cabin in the mountains. Some wounds needed solitude to heal. The sound of an approaching horse drew his attention. Abigail rode up the trail, handling her mount with growing confidence despite her permanent limp. The doctors in Laramie had done what they could, but some damages couldn't be undone, only accommodated. "The railroad survey came through," she announced without preamble, dismounting carefully. "They've approved the spur line to New Redemption. First train arrives next month." Colton nodded, offering her the cup of coffee he'd poured for himself. "Progress comes whether we want it or not." "This is good progress," she insisted, "built on fair deals and honest work, not theft and murder." He couldn't argue with that. Young's way of empire building had died with him. Perhaps this new beginning, painful as its birth had been, offered something better. "Will you come down for the celebration?" Abigail asked. "The town council is naming the new school after you. The man who saved redemption. They're calling you now." Colton shook his head, a half smile touching his weathered face. "I didn't save anything. You did that. You and your determination to find justice, no matter what it cost." "We did it together," she corrected him. "Two broken people who refused to be defined by their scars." As the sun began its descent behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of fire and gold, Colton Wade contemplated the strange turns life could take. He had come to these mountains seeking escape from the world of men and their wars. Instead, he'd found himself fighting one last battle, not for territory or pride, but for something far more valuable. The price of freedom, he realized, watching Abigail mount her horse to return to town, was never paid just once. It was an ongoing debt, requiring vigilance and courage from each generation. Young had tried to build an empire on the broken bodies of those he deemed expendable. What rose in its place might be something worthier, something built on the strength of those who refused to be broken. "See you at the town meeting on Thursday," Abigail called as she rode away. Colton raised his hand in acknowledgement, knowing he would be there. Some battles were worth fighting, some bonds worth honoring, and some stories, like his and Abigail's, were just beginning.